You've been getting hurt your whole life. And not just by the obvious things, not just by betrayal or loss or the moments that broke you open. You've been hurt by words people forgot they said, by looks that lasted a second too long, by silence that felt like rejection, by situations you replayed for days. And the strange part is, most of those moments weren't designed to destroy you. They didn't have to be. Because somewhere along the way, you handed people the power to reach you deeply, without even knowing you did it. And now you carry it. All of it. The offenses, the slights, the misunderstandings. You carry them like they belong to you, like they're yours to hold. But they're not. They never were. The Stoics understood something about pain that most people spend entire lifetimes missing. Pain doesn't come from what happens. It comes from the meaning you assign to what happens. That's the distinction most people never make. And without making it, you'll keep getting hurt, not because the world is cruel, not because people are unusually unkind, but because you're still operating on a set of rules that make you vulnerable to all of it. Marcus Aurelius wrote that very little is needed to make a happy life, that it's all within yourself, in your way of thinking, not in the situation, not in the other person, not in whether things go the way you wanted them to, in your way of thinking. That's where the protection lives. That's where the armor is built. But most people never go there. They stay on the surface. They manage the symptoms. They avoid certain people. They try to control what others say. They rehearse conversations. They seek reassurance. They explain themselves endlessly. And none of it works, not permanently, because you can't control the outside. You never could. What you can control is what's inside, and that's where this begins. Not with a technique, not with a set of rules, with a complete shift in how you understand what it means to be affected at all. You feel hurt when something lands, when it reaches you, when it gets through. And it gets through because you left a door open. Not intentionally, but the door is there. Your need for approval, your attachment to being understood, your expectation that people will treat you fairly. Each of those is a door. And the Stoic path isn't about slamming those doors in anger. It's about understanding why they were open in the first place. Think about the last time someone genuinely hurt you. Not a major crisis, something smaller, a comment, a dismissal, a lack of recognition, something that shouldn't have mattered. But it did. Why did it matter? Because somewhere inside you needed something from that moment. You needed to be seen. You needed to be validated. You needed the other person to behave in a way that confirmed something you believed about yourself or about them. And when they didn't, the gap between what you expected and what happened became the wound. That's what hurt you. Not them. The gap. Epictetus taught that we suffer not from events themselves, but from our judgments about events. And that judgment, that quick, invisible evaluation your mind runs in an instant, is where your pain is manufactured. It's happening beneath your awareness. Most of the time, you don't even catch it. You just feel the result. You just feel the sting, and you assume the sting came from outside. But it didn't. It came from the story your mind told about what just happened. Change the story. Change the experience. That's not avoidance. That's not pretending. That's mastery. Here's what most people do instead. They make the hurt mean something. They carry it forward. They turn a moment into a narrative. Someone disrespects you once, and suddenly your mind is building a case. You remember the other times. You find the pattern. You construct evidence. And now it's not a moment anymore. It's a verdict. A verdict about who they are, about who you are, about what you deserve. And you live inside that verdict. You let it shape how you show up, how you speak, how you trust. That's where the real damage happens. Not in the original moment, in everything that follows. The Stoics called this the second arrow. The first arrow is the event itself. Unavoidable sometimes, painful sometimes, real. But the second arrow is what you do after. The rumination, the resentment, the stories. The second arrow is always self-inflicted, and it's almost always worse than the first, because the first arrow fades. The second one you keep pulling out and pushing back in yourself. You keep choosing to carry it, even when you don't realize that's what you're doing. What's remarkable about understanding the second arrow is that it gives you permission to feel the first one. You don't have to suppress the initial reaction. You don't have to pretend the moment didn't land. The Stoics weren't about stuffing emotions or denying experience. They were about not compounding the original injury with endless elaborations on it. When someone says something hurtful, you might feel a sting. That's the first arrow. It's real. But then comes the choice. Do you spend the next hour constructing a narrative about what it means about you? Do you add layers of interpretation? Do you pull that arrow back out repeatedly and examine the wound? That's when it becomes a problem. The first arrow might hurt for a minute. The second arrow can hurt for years if you keep wielding it. One is circumstance. The other is choice. And choice, unlike circumstance, is always in your control. This distinction also explains why the same comment might devastate you one day and barely register the next. It's not that your resilience comes and goes. It's that your tendency to deploy the second arrow comes and goes. On days when you're grounded in yourself, when you're clear about what you actually believe and what actually matters, criticism or dismissal simply doesn't activate the narrative-building mechanism. It lands, and you let it fall. On other days, when you're depleted or uncertain, that same comment triggers a cascade of second arrows. The event was identical. Your response wasn't. That's the power of recognizing what's actually in your control. The event will come regardless. But the interpretation, the rumination, the narrative, those are yours to choose. So what does it actually look like to stop being hurt? Not to become numb, not to become cold, not to build walls so high that nothing gets through, including the good things, but to genuinely, deeply reach a place where the actions and words of others lose their power over your internal state. It starts with a single honest question. What do you actually need from other people? Not what you'd like, not what would be nice. What do you genuinely need to feel stable, clear, and whole? If your answer includes their approval, their understanding, their consistent kindness, their recognition, then you've already identified the problem, because those things are completely outside your control. They depend entirely on who those people are, on how they feel that day, on what they're carrying, on their own wounds and limitations. Making your peace conditional on any of that is like building your house on ground that someone else owns. They can shift it whenever they want, and you'll feel every tremor. The Stoic answer is to build on ground that's yours, your values, your judgment, your relationship with your own reasoning. That foundation doesn't move, not because life doesn't challenge it, but because it's rooted in something that isn't dependent on external conditions. Marcus Aurelius returned to this again and again. In the quiet of the night, writing only for himself, he kept reminding himself of the same thing. That his inner life was his domain. That no one could touch it without his permission. That people could take his time, his position, even eventually his life. But his character, his principles, his way of meeting each moment, those were his alone. That's not arrogance. That's the most grounded position a person can hold. Because it removes the leverage others have over you. If your peace doesn't depend on their behavior has no power over you. Not completely. Not deeply. You might notice it, you might even feel a flicker of something. But it doesn't reach you. Not at the level that changes you. Not at the level that costs you days of your life. There's something important to understand about people who hurt you. Most of them aren't doing it deliberately. That almost makes it harder to accept. Because deliberate cruelty is at least comprehensible. You can understand it even if you can't excuse it. But most of the hurt you carry came from people who weren't thinking about you at all. They were thinking about themselves, their frustrations, their needs, their unresolved history. And you happened to be in the path of it. That's not about you. It was never about you, it just felt like it was. Because you were the one standing there, you were the one who absorbed it, but absorption is a choice. Not always a conscious one, but it's still yours to make. When you understand that most of what people say and do is a projection of their own internal state, something shifts. You stop taking it personally, not because you're suppressing the feeling, but because you genuinely see where it's coming from. And it's not coming from your worth, it's coming from their noise. Consider this. When someone criticizes you, their criticism is filtered through their own biases, their own insecurities, their own incomplete understanding of the situation. A person who feels secure in themselves rarely launches attacks on others. A person who feels understood rarely misunderstands others. A person who feels valued rarely devalues others. So when someone hurts you with words or actions, you're often witnessing their own pain expressed outward. That doesn't make it acceptable. That doesn't mean you should tolerate mistreatment. But it does change the meaning you attach to it. It wasn't about your insufficiency. It was about their overflow. And there's a profound difference between those two interpretations. One makes you smaller. The other makes you clearer about what's actually happening. Epictetus was a slave. That's worth sitting with. He had no freedom in the conventional sense, no control over his body, his location, his daily life. And yet he became one of the most powerful thinkers on human freedom who ever lived. Because he understood that freedom isn't about external conditions, it's about internal sovereignty. He couldn't control where he was, he couldn't control what was done to him. But he could control his response, his interpretation, his stance toward his own experience. And from that position he was unbreakable, not because nothing touched him, but because nothing could reach the part of him that mattered most. That's the model. Not a life free from difficulty. A self that difficulty can't diminish. The question isn't how to stop things from happening. The question is how to stop things from defining you. So let's talk about what actually needs to change. Not in theory, in practice, in the way you actually move through a day. The first thing is your relationship with expectations. You're getting hurt because you're expecting things. You expect people to be consistent. You expect fairness. You expect that kindness given will be returned. And when those expectations aren't met, you experience the gap as an injury. The Stoic approach isn't to stop caring about people. It's to stop requiring specific outcomes from them. You can want things from people without needing them. You can prefer certain behaviors without demanding them. The moment you shift from need to preference, you take your vulnerability back. You're no longer standing there exposed, waiting to see if they'll hurt you or not. You're moving forward regardless. And that changes everything about how you feel when they don't show up the way you hoped. The second thing is your relationship with being misunderstood. This one runs deep, because most people carry a quiet belief that if they could just explain themselves clearly enough, people would understand them. And if people understood them, they'd stop misunderstanding them. And if people stopped misunderstanding them, the hurt would go away. But that logic is broken, because understanding isn't guaranteed by explanation. People understand you through the filter of who they are, their past, their fears, their beliefs, their need to see you in a particular way. You can explain yourself perfectly and still be misread. You can be completely transparent and still be misrepresented. And every time you chase their understanding, you're placing your stability in their hands. You're making their interpretation the condition for your peace. That's a condition you'll never fully meet. Because you can't control their interpretation. You can only control your clarity. And your clarity doesn't require their agreement to be real. There's a kind of pain that comes from wanting people to see your intentions and judging you instead for your impact. That's one of the sharpest hurts there is. You meant well, you tried, and they saw something different. And now you're left carrying the gap between what you meant and what they received. But here's what the Stoics would say. Your intentions are real. They're yours. They don't become unreal because someone else misread them. The truth of who you are doesn't change based on who's interpreting you. That's not cold or dismissive. It's actually the most stabilizing thing you can hold on to. Because if your sense of self is grounded in what you actually value and how you actually try to live, then no one's misreading can touch it. It might be frustrating, it might even be sad, but it can't hurt you at the core. Not the way it used to. The liberation that comes from this shift is almost imperceptible at first, and then suddenly obvious. You realize you've stopped spending your internal energy trying to manage how you appear. You've stopped running a constant calculation about how your words might be received. You've stopped preemptively defending yourself against interpretations that might never happen. That energy comes back to you, and you can invest it in what actually matters. The third shift is in how you hold resentment, because hurt that isn't processed becomes resentment, and resentment is one of the heaviest things a person can carry. It feels like power, like you're keeping score, like you're holding something over someone. But the Stoics saw it clearly for what it is, a poison you keep drinking yourself. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this. He reminded himself that the best revenge is simply not to be like that. Not retaliation, not even confrontation, just refusal to become what hurt you. Because resentment changes you. Slowly. In ways you don't notice until you're further from yourself than you ever intended to go. You become guarded, bitter, suspicious. You start protecting yourself from things that haven't happened yet. You start punishing people for what others did. And all the while, the person you resent is likely moving through their life without thinking about you at all. The resentment is yours. The damage is yours. The cost is entirely on you. Letting go of resentment isn't forgiveness in the conventional sense. It's not saying what happened was acceptable. It's not excusing the behavior. It's not pretending you weren't hurt. It's recognizing that continuing to carry it is a decision. And that decision is costing you something real. Your attention, your energy, your capacity to be present to what's actually in front of you. Every moment spent in resentment is a moment borrowed from your own life, given to someone who probably doesn't know or care that you gave it. That's the real injustice, not what they did, what you're doing to yourself in response to what they did. The Stoics weren't passive, they weren't doormats, but they were ruthlessly committed to not wasting themselves, and resentment is one of the greatest wastes there is. Now here's the part that's rarely discussed. The people who hurt you most aren't always the cruelest people. Sometimes they're the ones you let closest. Sometimes they're the ones you trusted completely. And the hurt from those moments isn't just about what they did. It's about what they're doing it revealed. About them. About the relationship. About what you believed the relationship was. That revelation is its own kind of grief. And grief isn't something you logic your way out of. You move through it, slowly, on its own schedule. But what the Stoics offer here isn't a shortcut past grief. It's a way of moving through it without losing yourself in it, without letting it convince you that the world is simply dangerous, without letting it train you to close off in ways that will hurt you long after the original wound has healed. The distinction is crucial. You don't skip over the sadness. You don't deny the loss. You simply refuse to let that loss become the foundation for how you relate to everything that comes after. Grief is a phase. It's natural. It's necessary. But it doesn't have to be permanent, and it doesn't have to reshape your entire approach to trust and connection. You can mourn what was lost while still remaining open to what might come. What changes when you truly internalize this? Everything. But it starts with something almost invisible. You stop bracing. Right now, without knowing it, you're probably bracing for hurt. You're anticipating it, managing the distance between yourself and people. Staying slightly guarded, never quite fully open. Because somewhere you learned that being open means being vulnerable, means being hurt. But that equation is wrong. Openness doesn't guarantee hurt. Attachment to outcomes does. You can be completely open with someone while being completely unattached to how they respond to that openness. That combination is what real strength looks like. Not walls, not distance, not strategy. Just a deep stability that doesn't require protection because it isn't afraid. Epictetus put it simply. Make the best use of what is in your power. Let the rest take its course. What's in your power is how you think, what you value, how you choose to respond. What's not in your power is how others behave, what they say, what they think of you, whether they understand you. When you stop trying to control the second category, something remarkable happens. You have so much more energy for the first. All the attention you were spending on managing perceptions, rehearsing defenses, tracking how you're being received, all of that comes back to you. And you can put it somewhere that actually matters. Into your work, into your relationships freely, without guardedness, into the things that genuinely build your life. This isn't a destination, it's a practice. Some days you'll catch yourself reacting before you think. You'll feel the old hurt rising. You'll notice you've been replaying something for an hour. That's not failure. That's the practice. Noticing it is the practice. Not beating yourself up for slipping back, but catching the drift, coming back, returning to the internal ground that's yours. Marcus Aurelius wasn't writing the meditations because he'd mastered all of this. He was writing them because he kept needing the reminders. Day after day, he was practicing. The same way you are, the same way all of this requires you to. Not one clean transformation, but a daily return to what you know when the moment pulls you away from it. The Stoic secret isn't a secret at all, really. It's not hidden. It's not complicated. It's just difficult. Because it asks you to stop outsourcing your stability, to stop handing the keys of your internal state to whoever's in the room, to build something inside yourself that doesn't shift every time the outside does. That's hard. It goes against patterns that are years deep. It goes against the way you learn to relate to people and to safety, but it's possible. Not perfectly. Not permanently. But more and then more and then more until one day you realize you're moving differently. That things that used to reach you simply don't anymore. Not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped needing them to be different than they are. That's not detachment. That's freedom. And it's available to you, right now, in how you choose to read this moment, in what you decide it means, in where you place your attention from here. If this way of thinking is pulling at something in you, don't let it fade. Stay with it. Return to it. Build on it. Because the shift doesn't happen in one moment of clarity. It happens in the accumulation of choices that follow. Each time you notice the reaction before it takes over. Each time you choose not to explain yourself to someone who isn't equipped to receive it. Each time you let something pass without giving it your energy. Each of those moments is the practice. And if you want to keep going deeper into this way of moving through the world, consider subscribing. Not out of habit, as a genuine commitment to thinking more clearly and living with more control than you did yesterday.